I'd like to get started here. This is the Urbana City Council meeting. Where is the clerk? The clerk was just here. Yeah. Debbie's here, right? Well, when the clerk gets here, we'll have a roll call. Okay, would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderpersons Barnes.
Here.
Bowersox.
Here.
Chenoweth.
Present.
Lewis.
Here.
Roberts. Smythe. Stevenson.
Present.
Mayor Pressing.
Here. Unless there are any objections, I would like to move to the very top of the agenda, the Risk Watch report, because we have a person from far away. And Chief Munt, Rex Munt, our fire chief, will introduce her.
Good evening. This is something that's long. Oh. Huh? It's on? Yeah. Good evening. There we go. Practice the low voice. This is actually something very long overdue, but we have a very problem with this evening. That earlier we laid out in each one of your chairs 2 charts, and that's what kind of smacked us between the eyes, to be real clear, to say we need to come in here and inform the council of a very successful program. That's a joint program of Carl Hospital, Urbana Police, Urbana Fire, and Urbana School District, that involves the safety of the children in our community. And so, not to steal any thunder, but to explain real quick, what you have in front of you are 2 charts, and across each one of those charts there's a color version, and the top one on the majority of all the columns is Urbana. And a few weeks back, representatives of our Risk Watch organization was attending the state conference and didn't even know this was going to be put up on the screen for the whole state to see. Urbana is leading the state in this program. And so I do not want to steal any more thunder, except to have the pleasure and the opportunity to introduce Patty Metzler, who is the Champaign County Risk Watch Coordinator, and she'll introduce the rest of the members of our team with her this evening. So thank you very much. Patty?
Good evening. I'm Patty Metzler. I work at Carl Hospital. I've worked there for 29 years. 27 of those have been in the emergency department. So very familiar with injury and unintentional injury. I'd like to introduce Linda Smith. She is our, well, tell them what you do.
I schedule the experts with the schools for assemblies and in-classroom programs.
And then we have Al Johnston.
With the City of Urbana, obviously, I handle the automobile safety, bicycle safety, and gun safety.
And the healthcare handles falls, choking, strangulation, suffocation, and poisonings. Phil Edwards is going to be here in a minute, but I'll let Tony introduce himself. Tony.
Yep, I'm Tony Foster, Division Chief of Prevention and Education, and obviously we take care of the fire end.
So I'm going to have you just look at the screen, if you would, because I want to tell you what Risk Watch is. It's a safety education program pre-K through 8th grade that provides curriculum into the schools, free to the schools. It provides experts for the classroom, and all of our people that are sitting here today go into the classroom as experts. We don't teach the curriculum. The teachers teach the curriculum, and then we go in as experts and just really come up behind the teachers and solidify what they've taught. So it's a multifaceted coalition, and I have to tell you, one of my biggest things for 27 years has been we have to educate the children to give them the tools to keep themselves safe. And quite frankly, I have a passion for it, and it's fabulous to work with the police department, the fire department, people from the school district, the American Red Cross, and also the Urbana Park District, to have the same passion that I have, and it makes it fun to do this program. These are just the people. I could use these logos, but I didn't have the American Red Cross or the Urbana Park District or the school district. But the beginning is that it started in 1998 as a pilot with the NFPA, which is the National Fire Prevention Association. And the pilot was very closely monitored to see what the knowledge gain was for the children. And they found that it was fabulous. So in 2002, it went nationwide. And also, Illinois got on board. And Urbana was one of the first communities that got on board with it. And you'll see that the 10 leading causes of death by age group for kids from 1 to 14 is unintentional injuries. And if you need examples, good grief, the biggest killer of children is motor vehicle crashes. And there's nothing that children won't do. And I think these are typical pictures, of what children do. And I especially like this little gal in the left-hand corner who has her helmet on upside down. So we do have to educate. And, I put a broken bone up there because, we can fix broken bones. But a lot of times we can't fix some of the really bad head injuries. We can't fix paralysis. So to educate them to make themselves safer is what we want to do with these kids. Phil Edwards has joined us from Urbana Fire, and Phil coordinates your Urbana team. And my reality is the same reality that these guys have. We see a lot of things that are avoidable and unintentional, and we like to see it stay on the decline instead of on the incline, and quite frankly, it has been. Research shows that, the control schools only have a 3 to 5% knowledge gain, and the risk watch schools have a 10 to 14%. And we do this from kindergarten through 5th grade is what we focus on here in Urbana. And quite frankly, it's repetitive, and they do have knowledge retention. And some people say, well, it's repeating year after year, you're in the schools. But I have to tell you, every time that I go in as an expert, I say, how many of you had risk watch last year? And we have such a mobile community that only half usually put up their hands. So we do a lot of stuff. We do Playing It Safe. We do Pediatric Awareness Day. We're in the schools. I like to point out that right-hand side in the middle, that Spencer Landsman, and he is the principal at Leal School, going down our slide, because we like to reward the children. We make this an interesting program for them. One of the things that we have here from Urbana Police Department is the animal control person. And a lot of people have pets, and they need to know that pet safety. We got on board with the natural disasters. We've got NOAA radios in every school in Urbana. And, Phil is doing a program there on the left-hand side at Lincoln Square. And quite frankly, I have to say that the fire department has so many things that they do. And the police department, Al has, I think, the hardest job of any of us, because he has to talk about gun safety, and nobody wants to. It's not a fun topic, is it?
No, it's very
it's serious, and
Joking around about it.
and when Al gets done with them, they have a healthy respect, and he just keeps driving that point home. Last year, we were awarded a Safe Community Award, and that's a national award. And the lady in that picture that you see, Pat Gonzala, is from the National Fire Protection Association, and she monitors our area, and she came specifically to give us the Safe Community Award. That bottom right-hand picture is one of the teacher trainings that we did when Champaign went district-wide, and Urbana came and did some training at that particular thing, too. Dr. Oliphant is a fabulous trauma surgeon, and he runs our trauma program, and he keeps saying, Patty, I can't put my finger on it, but I have to tell you something. Even if the kids are getting hurt, they're not getting hurt as severely anymore. And he truly attributes that to the efforts of all of these people that you're seeing sitting in front of you. And how does it happen? Well, Linda Smith schedules for us, because you have to have some organization. And the other thing is that we can tell you in 2005, 2006, how many kids got a safety area from an expert. We keep track of that. And this is how we do it. On the left is the date they go, the school they go to, the teacher who requested it, the age level that we're going to speak to, because you know what? You can't teach a kindergarten the same way you teach a 5th grader. And so then we have how many kids are going to be there, because if we take them things like I get pencils from the Poison Center, magnets from the Poison Center, I take something for everyone, and so does everybody here that can do that. We have our topic, who the expert is, and how many minutes we have in the school. So here are your schools that are involved. And this year we reached 1,130 students. And we spent almost 50 hours in the schools. And what we do is we combine our resources, we do assemblies, The teachers love us. We love the schools, and I always tell the teachers, you know, I know these children annoy you because you're with them every day sometimes, but to us going in, it's a breath of fresh air, and they see Al in a very non-threatening way, and that he is their friend. They see Phil and Tony in their gear, because we have people go in their uniforms. They don't just walk in on street clothes. They go in their uniforms, and so they become part of that community, and the kids really respond to them, and really, don't you find they want to touch you? They want to touch you, they want to hang on you, they want to be around you, they want to tell you stories. And when we say, does anybody have a question usually starts like this, and then it goes, what's your question? And the kid will go, well, one time. And you go, whoops, moving on. So really the summary to this is that we minimize the classroom disruption of routine, we maximize our resources, so it helps the schools, it helps us, it meets our mission, it meets the school's mission. We maximize the children that are reached, and they really are learning. And I think that all of the data that we show and the awards that we've gotten for this has shown that it's a very successful program, and we're very proud that Urbana is doing as well as it is. Do you guys have any questions? We're not going to take up a whole lot of your time. We just wanted to tell you that this is what your community's doing.
Thank
Mayor?
you so much. Thank you all.
One closing statement real quick is that, Patty mentioned this, and I'm going to take the liberty of speaking on behalf of Police Chief Bealey. We are clearly in debt to the teachers,
Yes.
because we could not accomplish this. This is truly carried by the teachers in our community that step up and incorporate this into the curriculum. Fortunately, the work is done for them, or we wouldn't get them because they're already too busy. But this is critical, that this is such a strong partnership. And then having a chance to watch this organization, this committee group, start in 2002 and struggle, and they never gave up. And then here we are leading the state. Is just a very proud moment for this city, for our schools, and for the folks sitting in front of you. So I want to thank them very much.
Thanks. And you know, I forgot to tell you that the program really meets all of the Illinois state learning standards that have to be taught in the school in the first place. We just make it happen a little bit more fun and faster.
Okay, thank you so
Thank
much.
you for having us.
Okay, next we have approval of minutes of the previous meetings, June 11th and June 18th. Is there a motion?
I'd like to move approval of the minutes of June 11th and June 18th.
Okay, motion by Ms. Barnes, seconded by Mr. Lewis. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, motion carries. Are there any additions to the agenda? If not, we will move on to petitions and communications. I have a number of cards that were filled out. First is Robert Dunn. Would you come and state your name and address? Thanks.
My name is Robert Dunn. I live at 804 South Urbana. I come before you again to urge this council to vote no on the Civilian Review Board. I don't want to repeat the information I said, but I have additional information and corrections to what was said last week. Alderwoman Chenoweth compared the city of Urbana to several cities in California in reference to the creation of a Civilian Review Board. However, she failed to mention that in a few of those cities, the crime rate has gone astronomically high in places like Richmond, Berkeley, and even some parts of San Diego. Why wasn't that mentioned? The second part that was totally absent from this discussion was who is speaking up for the victims of actual crimes in this debate. I've not heard anyone talk about what it feels like to be a victim of a crime. As someone who has in the past out in actually Berkeley as a victim of a mugging, I know what it's like to have to rely on the police and worry about if they're not going to get there in time or not. And so I appreciate every single law enforcement officer out there on the streets. Yes, I know that there are some bad apples out there in the orchard, but that doesn't mean that you burn the whole orchard down just because there's one or two bad apples. I want to reiterate that victims' rights are not being discussed here. We're talking more about the rights of actual criminals than the rights of actual victims. Who here wants to accept the responsibility if the crime rate goes astronomically high, if such a restrictive review board is passed in the city of Urbana, if when it is unsafe to walk in downtown Urbana because people are afraid of getting items stolen from them, getting held up, or getting attacked in really dark lit areas, who here wants to take that responsibility? Anyone? I mean, that's kind of like a heavy burden to be responsible for a high crime rate for an idea that actually represents, a tiny minority within the city. Another voice that has totally been absent from here is actual individual officers. I would like to hear individual officers' stories during public comments of what it's like to be out there on the streets. I mean, every day they risk their lives just so we can have safe streets, and they take so much abuse, and now we're saying that their own city government doesn't even support them. I'm sorry to say this, but there's already talk about a political repercussion if this happens. 2009 is approaching, folks. If you pass this, a lot of your seats are going to be targeted, and it's not going to just be putting a name on there. We're going to campaign. We're going to campaign heavily. And maybe we may unseat you because of this. So I'm urging you, not just for your political sake, I'm urging you for the city of Urbana's sake, vote no on this item when it comes up. Thank you.
Thank you. Esther, Charlie?
Mr. Dunn, I'm a trained statistician. That's what I do for a living. You've raised some pretty serious allegations here. You've thrown out some correlations with no proof. Do you have some? I mean, other than just, liquor sales are high in the South and, there's a disproportionate number of Baptist preachers in the South. That's the kind of correlation you brought up. So what proof do you have of the allegations?
Go on the City of San Bernardino, California's website where they just implemented a police review board with the same type of restrictions.
What's the correlation and what's the statistical proof of your allegation?
Well, I don't think there's a statistical proof. I think there's a logical proof that if you handcuff police officers and restrict them, they're probably going to be afraid to do their job, and so criminals are going to feel that they can run free.
What about all the others? What about all the other cities that have review boards as well without a crime problem?
I don't know. I didn't look at them. I just noticed
yeah.
the
So
California
what's the statistical proof of what you've just said?
I don't have.
Can you bring me a study?
I think we need to move on now, but thank you very much. Esther, Pat?
Thank you. Esther Pat, 706 South Kohler. I just wanted to raise 4 points about the Civilian Review Board, partly in response to comments like the previous speakers. First, it's important that we all remember that in this country, both the guilty and the innocent are entitled to civil rights and civil liberties. Equally important, and I think this is possibly one of the biggest misconceptions out there among opponents of Civilian Review Board, a large number of people, possibly the majority, but I don't know this for a fact, but certainly a large number of people who file complaints with review boards are not criminals, and they are not people who were arrested. They are perhaps people who are law-abiding citizens who felt in a particular incident that the police treated them as though they were a criminal and didn't like it, or have some other concern about the behavior of public servants in relation to them. But a lot of people who file complaints to civilian review boards around the country are people who were not arrested for a crime. Third point, which relates to the discussions you folks had last week, it's really important for a review board to have access to all the information that the police department has access to, all the reports and all of the witnesses, in order to do a proper, legitimate, thorough job. And the reason for it, which is my fourth point that seems to have gotten lost in all the controversy, is the primary purpose of a civilian review board is to bolster the public's confidence in the police department. That is why cities do this. And I think that, not to speak for all of you, but I think that the mayor and the Urbana City Council members, like the mayors and council members all over the country, have a lot of confidence in and appreciation for the police department and the police officers, from the chief right down to, well, every single person in the department. And I think certainly the public, most people want the help of police whenever they need it, are glad the police are there, and are also appreciative not only of the work they do, but of the danger involved in the job, the serious risks they take, and how hard a job it is. That is why it's so important to be able to have review, so that when someone has a complaint, the public has confidence that the complaint has been properly investigated, not by the department against whom the complaint has been made, but by some independent body. We were told by people who attended the conference, I guess now it's been almost 2 years ago, where folks from all over the country who have these boards were in attendance, that the majority of cases brought before civilian review boards result in a finding by the board in support of the finding of the chief of police. If you want the public to have confidence when that finding comes down in support of the chief of police and the police department and the officers, it is essential that people believe the board that came to that finding was acting with full knowledge and independent of the city, and that they came up with that finding because it was the correct finding. So I urge you not to go overboard in trying to tie the hands of a review board. If you have a body that is seen as an agent of the city that is limited in its review of the police, then people will not have confidence when the board finds that the police officer acted correctly and that the department procedure was appropriate, and that will undermine your purpose. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Esther. Ruth Wyman?
Hi, my name is Ruth Wyman. I live at 706 South Kohler, apartment 6 in Urbana. I address you both as a former city council member who served in that seat for 8 years, and also as an attorney. And I think I bring to you what I hope is what I believe is a unique perspective, that is being, again, responsible for the management of the city, but also having worked with, over the past 3.5 years or so, the individuals who have had direct interactions with the police, those who have been arrested and those who have been treated by the police, and although they were not, there was no action taken against them, felt that they were mistreated by the police. I think it's important for the City Council to remember that you are the boss of the police department. If someone sues because of how they were treated by a police officer or officers, they don't sue versus the Urbana Police Department. They sue you all. It's the city of Urbana, and you all are in charge of and have the fiscal responsibility to manage and to defend the entire city of Urbana, including the police department. But for those who say that, well, if you have a problem with the police, just sue them, I think there's an important role that the Citizen Police Review Board can and should take. While legal action against individual police officers or against the city of Urbana, when and if its police officers take actions that the citizen believes are in violation of their civil rights, it's an action that can take several years in order to resolve, and it deals with one incident or one issue. What a Citizen Police Review Board has the ability to do, and what I think it can do, and can do very well if it's implemented, is to look at whether there is a pattern or practice that comes up, not just one time, but over and over and over again, that the city, as the managing authority of the police department, needs to take a look at. I bring to you one example that I'm sure is still pretty raw for a lot of city council members, and that's the Kurt Yort case. Imagine if a Citizen Police Review Board had been in place when the complaints first started to come in against Urbana's former police officer, Kurt Yort. Women who complained apparently about sexual harassment by this officer. Would the end result, which was a woman being raped by Officer Yort on duty, have taken place? Would that woman have been assaulted? Would other women have been sexually assaulted or harassed? Had there been a Citizen Police Review Board in place that had received these complaints and been able to investigate it and seen, you know what, there is a pattern here. There is one officer that is being complained about over and over and over again. Or maybe they wouldn't even know the name, but boy, there's certainly complaints that are coming in. There would be confidence, I believe, that the police department and that the city of Urbana was taking a look at these issues and was investigating these. Again, it's the confidence that citizens, black, white, Latino, need to be able to have in the city of Urbana and how it manages and runs all of its departments, including the police department. There's a Latin phrase, and I don't know it, I only know its translation, and that is, who shall guard the guardians? That's your job, and that's what the Citizen Police Review Board does. There are elections that provide an oversight for how the city council and the mayor do, and what the work they do, and that's every 4 years. If you all aren't doing a good enough job, the citizens can provide that oversight by having an election and by deciding who they're going to elect. There is no open sort of oversight for the police, other than the police department, and of course those are kept without any sort of oversight or public oversight for the citizens or for the city council. A citizen community police review board would provide the oversight that I believe would give citizens the confidence that the city is concerned about and taking responsibility for the actions of its police department. I urge you to support a strong citizen police review board. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Chris Evans.
Hello, I'm Chris Evans. I'm a resident of Urbana, and I work over at the Independent Media Center. And I want to thank you, Madam Mayor, for keeping your campaign promise. This is a very courageous thing that you've done and the council has taken on. Citizens Review Board has been reluctantly has been met with opposition by the law enforcement community, and it's kind of disappointing to see over the last couple of years that they wouldn't want oversight. They are the good guys. They are the guys that I call, and you can tax me twice for the service. So this has nothing to do with disrespecting the police or anything like that. My experience has been mostly through meeting the poor and those that are most affected by the police, those that are arrested, as well as the families of those people and the neighborhoods of those people. And while we in the white community don't seem to have a problem with the police, oftentimes we need to recognize that not everyone feels the same way and not everybody gets treated the same way. And these specific examples that are being provided for you when police have gone awry as human beings they are, they're subject to the same temptations of corruption and crime that everybody else is. So there have been some incidences within the police department where officers have broken the law and have violated civil liberties. Internal affairs is not sufficient enough to prevent those officers from, at this time, the system is not in place to prevent those officers from taking liberties with the law and the citizens. Those complaints are real. Those complaints exist, and sadly, it's gotten so bad that some citizens think that they'll be retaliated against. I think that the Citizens Review Board can improve our police department. I think that you wouldn't have your running on your force if you'd listened to Sergeant Mike Miller when he said, look, officers are using MedCAD system to look up the addresses of pretty girls. You wouldn't have Michael Alexander and Trina Fairley and Ray Hassai being tortured by a Sergeant Myers if Michael Rich's complaint had been taken seriously in November of 2004. I think the temptation for someone, and let's be fair, I mean, most of the police officers do an outstanding job. I've been stopped 36 times, and 33 times it was outstanding service. But I'll tell you, when you've been, no, that's true. 33 times it's been very professional service. But the 3 times that my constitutional rights were violated, you don't forget it, and you really realize the power that we the police have, and if somebody decides to lie or somebody decides to cheat, it's really hard to stop that because of the image that they should have. So I would encourage you to see the CRP as a way to improve the police department and the way to have the citizen cooperation, and we'll gain the trust, regain that trust. And I see Urbana's police department doing improving itself, and I think the chief is absolutely right when he says this could improve citizen relationships out there on the streets. And for officer safety, I say let's do that. Let's make it so that they can know that the rules are understood and everybody's abiding by them. And that's all I have to say.
Charlie Smythe.
Chris, thanks for your comments. You realize, of course, that whatever we do here has no impact on Champaign or the county. And we keep getting these examples that are Champaign and the county, not our police department. Now, there's been one major incident that was raised by the previous speaker, and I acknowledge that, but so many examples that are being used are not the Urbana Police Department, and so, and to echo what Lynn said last week too, we want to get to a point where we're supportive of both our citizens and our police department. We don't need a sledgehammer to take care of something that a tack hammer is appropriate for. And so, as people discuss this, I'd like people to remember, that this, we're only dealing with Urbana here, not the whole county, not the whole state, that we can't solve all of the issues that are being raised yet. Sometimes it sounds like we're supposed to solve the world's problems here.
Well, no, that's not the case. The examples that we're citing you is just to let you know that that the work of police work can cause corruption, and it does happen. And we certainly don't expect you to fix what might be the Champaign County government to do and Champaign police ought to be doing. I'm just telling you that the police are trained at Parkland College, at the PTI. They do SWAT teams together and they investigate. Our Florida police departments represent a single culture. And that's not to say to drag Urbana's police department into this, but I want to applaud you folks for trying to implement a system that's going to keep, at least the Urbana Police Department, held to account. And those specific examples are only that sometimes things can go awry.
Well, hopefully we can set a good example.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. Patrick Thompson. Would you please state your name and address and keep it as not any longer than 5 minutes?
5 minutes. Okay. My name is Patrick Thompson. I now reside at 1809 Winchester Drive in Champaign, Illinois. And I want to come in today to support the Citizen Review Board. I think it's needed, and I'm going to give some testimony to some personal testimony in regards to some of the Urbana police officers and how I felt that if something like this may have been in place, that it may have prevented or discouraged them from pursuing a bogus charge against me. And one of the things I want to give testimony to is the fact that we had some some officers that were came out to take a police report, and one of the officers' name was Michael Hediger, and I don't know the other officer's name, but this was in 2004, and they came out and did a police report and took a couple statements from some of the young ladies out there at the apartment complex. This was in 2004. In 2006, after 2 years later, there were some additional officers, and one name was Dwayne Maxey, and this is somewhat personal, but I'm going to go into it anyway. And but they actually came out to my wife's job, and which was kind of disturbing to her. She had just got this job, and it was a professional managerial job. So she had been only in that job for about a year, and as a black woman, it's not easy getting those kind of jobs here in Champaign-Urbana. But they came out there twice. For what purpose, I don't know. But it eventually it ended in her being terminated from her job. So that was a kind of tactic that I think that they deployed just to orchestrate something like that, because I think if anybody had a couple officers coming to your job and calling you out and subpoenaing you to court, that your job, your employees surely probably would be want to know what's going on. And that affected me, that affected my family, and those are the kind of things that some of the officers are doing. I'll speak to another officer, and that was his name is Sergeant Sanders, who signed off on the police report. And I would thought me and him we had a pretty good relationship going, but come to find out we didn't. And those are the kind of codes of silence that are going on amongst the officers. When you turn and look the other way, that means that you are in support and you're encouraging that type of behavior. Now, I have no problem with police officers if they're doing a good job. I'm 100% behind. I know a few knuckleheads. I think that would like for them to come out. Would also like to see more African Americans from my community involved. Maybe that'll cut out on some of the racial tension that goes on in the community when white officers are approaching some of the young men in the community for various reasons, jaywalking, bicycle incidents, loud music, and it's going from that to them being charged with felony crimes, and those things are just getting blown out of proportion, and it's an intimidation thing. And when you talk about, if I go out and commit a crime, or one of us go out and we do something, or we victimize somebody, it surely, we'll be held responsible for that through the course of law. But when it comes to officers and some of their behavior and some of those things, there's no accountability. There's nothing that we have in place to ensure that they won't be, doing those kind of things. And I think it's important that we all have some kind of checks and balances in place, accountability, so that we ensure that, our rights won't be violated, our civil rights won't be violated. So I'm just here today to hope that that you guys take in consideration that this is something that we seriously need. I don't think it's going to be, I don't believe that it would be abused by people that they are calling criminals, because I don't know anybody that's out there that's selling drugs or whatever, robbing banks, that's going to be coming to the Citizen Review Board or filing complaints talking about their rights have been violated and they've been passing drugs or robbing banks. So I think that's, it's ridiculous, but I think average citizens and average people and, especially people in my community, they just want equal treatment. They want to be treated fair. So I hope you guys give consideration and really take what we're saying tonight and try to implement something that'll work for everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Cope Cumston.
Hello, I'm Cope Cumston. I live at 402 West Nevada Street in Urbana. And I am thrilled that a police review board has come this far. I worked on an early version of a committee to put forth a proposal, and I believe it would be a very positive thing for the city and for the community. Since I've lived here, one of the major problems I've seen in this community is the lack of communication and lack of trust between largely black and white. That, you know, it falls in different divisions, but that's where I've seen problems, and many of those focus on police issues. And as a member of the Human Relations Commission in Urbana for quite a while, I know how difficult it is to have open conversation when people are complaining on any side. The other side tends to shut down. And when I saw the description of how the Civilian Review Board would function as proposed, the first thing that worried me was that complaints would be taken through the police department. I'm told over and over and over again that people who have had difficulties with a police interaction are afraid or reluctant to give a complaint to the police department, and this strikes me as absolutely natural.
Cope, I think you should know that there is direct, someone can file a complaint directly with the Civilian Review Board. There's an alternative.
Okay.
Okay.
It was described otherwise in one piece that I heard. Okay.
I think most of the complaints will be filed with the police department, and if someone is dissatisfied with how the complaint was treated, they can file with the Citizen Review Board, but someone who doesn't want to go to the police can go directly to the Civilian Review Board.
Okay. Well, largely I see the role of the Civilian Review Board as to improve communications between police and the community, and I think that the way it's handled, a review board has to have the tools necessary in order to fairly and objectively assess what has happened. And as Esther Pat said, largely complaints are found against the complainant, not against the police in other cities that have these things. But I think it's critical for this community to create a vehicle where there can be better communication between the community and between the police, and that this review board, I hope you will go back and look very carefully at all the steps so that it will have the tools it needs to make it successful. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan Parenti?
I will take 5 minutes, as was asked of Patrick. My name is Susan Parenti. I live at 902 South Lincoln in Urbana. I'm interested and support the Citizen Police Review Board. In response to Mr. Smythe's comments to Chris Evans, I'm a person who thinks that we need to act and think locally and globally. And I do think what we're deciding here has ramifications in our country and across the world. The idea that a regulatory system, which a police system is, can develop so that they can act with impunity is undesirable. And those of us who study systems historically do see a tendency of regulatory systems like the police to, as was mentioned before, to guard, but not have a guardian guard them. And we actually have at the moment, globally, if I may, I'm trying to use a tack hammer here and not a sledge, Mr. Smythe. We are in a social situation globally where we are finding that people and institutions are acting with impunity. So that I don't maybe sound like I'm just saying what everyone else is saying in my support, I'd like to bring up something that you probably are unfamiliar with, but that's a wonderful new direction. I work as a consultant to the medical community for the last 10 years, and there is in certain progressive cities, Portland, Boise in a section, Seattle, the attempt to establish what's called a Civilian Medical Review Board. I don't know if you're aware of this. This came about because of the detrimental effects of malpractice insurance and malpractice suits. Physicians have to carry up to $100,000 of malpractice insurance. They act in fear of their patients. Patients, sick people, are frustrated with the lack of care. And malpractice was a way to tell physicians or hospitals that you cannot act with impunity towards me. Okay, taking the correlation world, the world of the police and the world of the medical establishment don't exactly map. However, I would like to point out that this attempt in the last 5 years to establish these civilian medical review boards is because of the exact same reason, is that there is the thought that there is a lack of public confidence in the mechanisms, particularly of corporate care. There's a lack. And the only avenue is lawsuits, tremendously expensive and detrimental for all sides. So small communities are attempting to establish this trust by having civilian medical review boards. And it's also interesting for me, given the data that I have, is that the same places that are establishing citizens police review boards are also attempting to establish civilian medical review boards. Now, Mr. Smythe, why one needs a sledgehammer is because the resistance to both of these review boards comes from an obfuscation. There's an assumption that it's a criticism of the police or a criticism of doctors. There's always an attempt to scale it down as though you're saying we haven't done a good job. To scale down what is a civic and structural problem to a you don't like the way the police are acting, or I as the attorney of the state, or whatever it is. Now, this obfuscation has to be attacked with a sledgehammer. This is a structural problem. One needs to regulate regulators. Simply put, it is not having to do with handcuffing the police and all this reductionism of an obviously clear, intelligent move that one needs to watch areas where people are acting with impunity. That's why one has to use a sledgehammer. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Morton Brussel.
Yeah, my name is Mort Brussel. I live in Urbana, George Huffs Drive. I don't know that I have really very much more to add to what has already been said, but I just am here to reiterate some of the things. We need the police. I think everybody recognizes that. They protect us, but they also have a power which can be abused. And we all know that power can be corrupting. It's happened. It's happened elsewhere. We're not unique. Our police are not unique. They're the same kind of police that exists in many communities. There should be, if there is abuses, obviously there has to be a way which is independent of police supervision to evaluate what has been done in those cases where abuse has been done. So I'm just here to say that I hope you install a police review board that has teeth, and whatever that implies. It has to have an independent structure, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob Kirshner.
Good evening. My name is Bob Kirshner. I live at 215 East Sherwin Drive. I know many of you, but not all of you. I won't reiterate all of the things that others have said. I would agree that an effective and police review board that has a mechanism in place to be effective would be good public policy, and I would urge you to adopt such a review board. I have some specific comments about the ordinance, though, that I would like to share, and I'll be brief with respect to all of them. In Section 19-22, there's a provision that makes a person with a criminal felony conviction or plea, and I'm not sure what the distinction to be drawn there is, since typically a plea in a felony case results in a conviction. But that such a person would be ineligible to serve on the Police Review Board. I don't know what the policy determination behind that would be, and I would suggest that perhaps that should be rethought. There's no time limit, for example. If someone had a felony conviction at age 19 for theft above a certain dollar limit, and at age 50 they wanted to serve on the Civilian Review Board, they would be disqualified under the terms of this proposed ordinance. There's also no distinction between types of offenses. So felony offenses that may be as simple as theft above a specified dollar amount would be treated the same way as perhaps a more serious felony. The appointment power is a mechanism to determine the appropriateness of eligibility for the review board, and I would suggest that disqualification based on a prior felony record would not be an appropriate thing to do. In Section 1926, you have mechanisms that effectively filter and eliminate access to information, and I think it was Esther Pat who suggested that, I think it was her, who suggested that access to information is critical to the process and to instilling integrity in the process. And one of the mechanisms filtered in 1926 is if there is a law enforcement objective. I have no idea what that means. Of course, phrases aren't defined, but there's no parameters set forth to define or limit the interpretation of law enforcement objective as a mechanism to keep information from being revealed or used in the process. In conjunction with your confidentiality provisions, that seems particularly inappropriate. In 1928, you limit complaints to those which allege misconduct, but you don't define misconduct. For example, if an officer stops someone claiming that they failed to signal a turn within 100 feet of an intersection, that would be a violation of the Motor Vehicle Code. But if the real reason for the stop is because there was a young black person, a young African American driving, and that is the basis of the complaint, and they want to proceed on that basis, and others have been subjected to similar stops, would that be misconduct? It's not defined. The scope, again, if you're going to have an effective ordinance, I would suggest should include filtering devices, should not include filtering devices such as that. If a citizen wants to make a complaint, I'm not sure I understand the policy reason behind limiting it to an allegation of misconduct. Most seriously, in that same section, the notion that the public or citizens who would come to the City of Urbana, to an agency of the City of Urbana, a Civilian Review Board, and be threatened with criminal prosecution for perjury for bringing to your attention a complaint about police officers, I find particularly troublesome and inappropriate. And although I have not had an opportunity to research it, I suspect there would be strong constitutional problems with criminally prosecuting someone who seeks to file petitions or redresses or seek grievances with a public body by making a complaint. In subsection F of that same section, you provide a mechanism for extending the time period for filing for those that are physically unable. There's no consideration given to those that are psychologically or for mental health reasons may have a delay in filing that complaint, and I would suggest that's just as compelling as physical reasons. In subsection I of that same section, you provide that the police department will conduct an investigation of the complaint. Throughout this proposed ordinance, there are time frames. I may have overlooked it. Doesn't seem to be a time frame for the police to complete the investigation. A timely completion of the investigation is necessary if it's going to have any impact whatsoever. There are ambiguities, I think, with respect to the 45-day requirement, whether a hearing has to be set within 45 days and actually heard, or whether they just have to meet to set a hearing maybe 180 days later. I have trouble with the notion that a public body would meet in closed session and be compelled by your ordinance to keep in confidence all matters discussed during the hearing, if in fact this is intended in any respect to provide some degree of assurance to the public that there is an effective and worthwhile mechanism for reviewing complaints involving the police. in subsection H of 1932, you talk about the Civilian Review Board, and actually, I also think it's better styled as a citizen review board rather than civilian, although police agencies often consider themselves to be paramilitary organizations. The CRB weighs the facts and reaches a conclusion based on the preponderance of the evidence, but you don't have any provision for the officer involved, the very person that this board is going to make some determinations about their conduct. You don't have any mechanism for them participating. And in fact, they can choose not to participate. Your findings and conclusions, essentially, if I'm reading this correctly, are intended to determine whether the chief's determinations should be sustained. It's not truly an independent investigation of the facts, as the preliminary sections would indicate that it should be. So, for example, if the chief's findings say Officer X says Y, or Officer X says the following, the citizen says this, I find that there was no violation of policy. Under this draft of the ordinance, I believe that that finding would have to be sustained simply because the chief has determined, based upon a review of the officer and the complaint, that in fact there's the complaint is unfounded. In 1936, as I indicated, you have no mechanism for the officer even being involved, despite the fact that the review board purports to review that conduct. In 1937, you allow for the city, the chief of police, to suspend automatically, without discretion, further proceedings, but you don't have a corollary provision for the citizen who's involved. With a final comment with respect to the notion that about this sledgehammer or attack hammer or whatever the phrase was, it would seem to me that the city of Urbana has an interest in taking action, such as the implementation of Civilian Review Board, in order to prevent the necessity of a sledgehammer being necessary a year or 2 years or 3 years down the road. An effective Civilian Review Board, if implemented properly and functioning properly, has the ability to also instill confidence in the community, and I would urge you to adopt them.
Thank you. Aaron Ammons.
Good evening. I'm Aaron Ammons, 1108 North Busey in Urbana, Illinois. Just recently got back from Denver, Robert. Met with your brother. I came here and come here to learn about city government and to participate in it. Therefore, I have listened and learned and wish to be heard as well. I ask, have any of you investigated or revisited the issue of felony disenfranchisement and have a reply or a question about the issue I raised last week?
The Civilian Review Board was put together with not having former police officers or current police officers, and the Fraternal Order of Police thought it would be fair to say, if you're going to limit police officers from serving, we should eliminate former felons from serving. So that was the rationale. Now, this is just an initial ordinance. It's going to be reviewed, I believe, in 18 months or whatever time, and if that wants to be revisited, people can revisit it, but that was the rationale.
Okay, so based upon that, Madam Mayor, are you telling me that there will be no revisiting of that issue, that it will be put into the ordinance as such that felons cannot?
Well, we have an agreement with the FOP on that, but I'm saying if it, we want to get something started, and if this becomes a problem, we can sort of adjust it later, but it's going to have to be with a different contract with the FOP, because that was a side letter with their contract. But to answer your question of where did it come from, I looked it up. That's where it came from.
To be clear, my question wasn't where it came from. My question was, had any of you revisited or investigated the disenfranchisement that you have voted to go along with in this particular ordinance? That's what the question.
We haven't voted on the ordinance, but we have an agreement, and I think we need to abide by the agreement, and that was the rationale for the agreement. So I'm not going to be proposing that we change it. I think it would be very difficult to change at this point, but perhaps it could be changed in future years.
So, in essence, this body did indeed agree, so they did vote to support the disenfranchisement of those
No,
who've been
this
convicted
body
of
has
felony.
not voted on this yet, okay?
But you did say you all agreed.
No,
with the
I didn't say we
proposal.
all agreed. I'm telling you where it came from and what my opinion is and what the timeline could be.
Okay. I just want to be clear. I'm not trying to be antagonistic. I just want to be clear in my understanding. The Fraternal Order of Police said that if police cannot serve, then they suggest their proposal is that felons cannot serve. And in order for that to go through, this council said, okay. Is that correct?
That's correct in terms of approving the contract with FOP. You're absolutely correct.
Okay. So, with that issue, I'll leave that issue alone. Another point that I want to make in reference to the Citizens Police Review Board is that it's not about incidents that have occurred, actually. It's about prevention being better than detention. Okay, so just throwing that point out there. My next point about the CPRB relates to a case that I have been following and quote-unquote investigating for the past 3 years now, the case of Patrick Thompson, as you all are well aware of. I have the pleasure and had the pleasure of meeting with Chief Bigley and another officer, I can't recall his name at this particular point, myself and a couple of my colleagues, and we met with him about the procedures and the lack of appropriate investigation in this particular case. Now, without going into a bunch of details, as a concerned citizen, I walked away from the meeting feeling that our newly selected chief would do his best to address such issues in the future. I also walked away knowing that the buck stopped right there. Now, as a tax-paying American citizen, I know that no governmental body should be judge and jury in their own case. Such a position is in direct opposition to the principles of democracy. So a question I have is this, to the officers who I know are putting their lives on the line, who do a decent job, who do a good job overall. I too agree that you shouldn't allow one bad apple to spoil a whole bunch. And I don't think that I think we have to be very careful about our language, because we're not trying to burn down a whole orchard, okay? And we're not talking about criminals' rights being discussed only, because as someone alluded to, they're not just criminals who are going to be coming to file a complaint. And I would dare to say that there's not a person in this room, officers included, or in Champaign County, who have not committed a criminal offense. So should we all be deemed criminals based upon that? So now, my question is, if we are asked to trust the officers with full discretion, access to our personal information, guns, as we saw the beautiful case back there, right, and the undeniable support of the public and the criminal justice system, why can't the review board have full access to information and subpoena power? That's my questions.
Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Ivan Ruiz of South Walnut Street in Urbana. And I wasn't coming here to talk tonight. I did enough speaking last time. But as I walked in, I thought it was Charlie Smythe, or is it Smith, bro? Smythe. Say something about the cases that have been discussed at the moment, having been cases outside of Urbana, about police malfeasance, etc. And I sort of not even want to talk anymore about the things that have happened to me personally with the police here in Urbana. I sort of wanted to put that in the past and just move on. But it really bothers me hearing that, like, we have no problem here in Urbana and that there's no need for a police review board because of that. Well, that's the farthest from the truth, my friends. I can tell you of a particular case where I partially witnessed, a a former student being aggrieved, a student of the Urbana High School being aggrieved by a former student right in front of my house about midday. And at the urging of a certain member of the, a citizen of Urbana, I agreed to testify on behalf of the city, on behalf of the police department, about what I saw. And the policewoman that I gave testimony to was Deanne Wynn. I don't know if she's still with the police department. Deanne Wynn is the name. Well, the fact is that, to my amazement, this person perjured herself in court by accusing me of not following her orders because I had cleaned the blood in front of my house because I didn't want my twin, I think they were in first grade or in kindergarten at the time, they would be coming home a couple hours after that, and I didn't want them to see this blood spot on the sidewalk right in front of my house. And this woman actually testified and looked at me as she testified that she had told me point blank that I had been given an order which I didn't obey, which was not to clean the blood. That woman wasn't even there when this happened, and there were two policemen there, and I asked them, and they said, sure, as long as you don't touch the car. So I took a hose, and a whole procedure. First, I used a pitcher of water. That didn't work, so I went and got the hose out because it's in the wintertime. I had to go and turn the water from inside the basement, and et cetera, et cetera. So after the hearing, after this, I think it was just a sentencing hearing or something like this, she came up to me and actually told me that she had forgotten what had happened. Her memory failed her. And then that's why she testified like that. So I could just imagine, had I been a student at the university, of the high school where she was assigned as a policewoman, what would happen to that person, to that student, if this person had testified in the same way against that person? That student would never have had a chance, never. And this is the line that goes on when I testified last time about the tested line that goes on across the nation, and we have a little bit of that in our department. That happened to me only. Imagine how many times this has happened where people have not been able to have the opportunity to come up here and speak about this. Second case that happened to me, and we happen to have the pleasure of having that officer involved, Officer L. Johnston, sitting right over on this side, the husband of our current state's attorney. And this man came to my house one evening and in front of my children accused me of having, and using the way the gesticulation he used, bumped a car belonging to someone affiliated with the judicial system in the park district of Urbana. And I had just come back after having parked my car like 10 or 12 days in Indianapolis, because I had taken my children to see my folks down in Florida. This is during the Thanksgiving week. And so when I asked this man, I said, show me what you're talking about. And he said, what part of my bumper hit this car you're talking about? He goes, that corner right there. There were some striations in that corner. I said, wait a minute. That corner already suffered damage before, and I reported this, and it's been paid for. Another incident that happened at a parking in Champaign. And so then he proceeded to take a plastic bag, a junked up plastic bag from a sandwich that had pieces of old sandwich in it, a slip-up bag, and he took a little penknife out of his pocket, and he proceeded to take a 1/4-inch white-colored plastic chip from my bumper, my white GMC van, and put it in the envelope. And I said, what are you doing? He says, I'm going to send this to the crime unit. I said, well, if I did something, I have insurance for that, but I doubt it. Sure as heck that was me. So what happens after all this? 10 months later, I say 10 months later, he showed up on September 5th, if my memory served me right. I forgot what year it is anymore. It was like 3 years ago, the weekend of the Labor Day. And he tells me, and he brings out his hand like this, and he comes to the front door again and says, remember that white chip, that paint chip that I took out of your car? It matched the paint on the other car. And I was just livid. I said, show me the evidence. And he went to his car, rummaged around, and said he couldn't find the report. And I said, look, just give me the report, and I'll give it to my attorney. You know, so the next thing I know, a couple hours pass possibly, he comes back and charges me with a hit-and-run violation. This is the kind of stuff that happens every day, my friends. If you're white, middle class in this town, you have nothing to fear. This probably won't happen to you. This is the kind of stuff that only happens to people that are assumed to have no power, are assumed to not be able to come up and speak about these things, are assumed not to be able to fight these situations. This entire incident took a lot from me, a lot from my family, a lot of stress. It involved an awful lot of people in this town. I fought this, and I won. A lot of people are not as successful. About the most that I have on my record are a couple of moving violations. One, as an employee of the state of Illinois, that I was trying to reach Chicago, 8 o'clock in the morning. I had just finished a paper here as a graduate student, and I was speeding up I-57 so I can get a couple hours of sleep before I had to be at this meeting at 8 o'clock. And again, this kind of stuff does happen here. And I want, parenthetically, since it was brought up that about reports now, that we have no availability, that we cannot have access to our police reports, it was because of the police report that I found out that the white paint chip that this officer took from my car, it ended up on the police report as multiple black paint chips. That was the evidence that was presented to the state. They actually brought in a PhD in chemistry from Springfield, Illinois, to attend to this case. The whole shebang. I mean, this was like a sure bet. And it backfired. The truth came out. So if it had not been for the fact that I was able to get that report, I would never have been able to know that this was the truth, that this was what was being done. So it's really important. And I really, that we challenge this ruling, 215 or whatever it was, that Supreme Court ruling, what number was it, 415? 415C, because it's bad. So I also want to say how much time it takes for people who have been charged with crimes that have not been committed. There's a gentleman here right now, a typical traffic stop, and being accused of having cursed the police 14 times or something like that. And this is the kind of stuff, it's absurd. But this absurdity causes people to have to hire attorneys and spend time and also face the possibility of jail time because of police malfeasance. So if anyone thinks that we are in some kind of a void, that we don't have these kinds of problems, that it's only Champaign or it's only the police and the county police, you're wrong. And I really urge the passing of this ordinance. But again, as I said last time, if it doesn't have teeth, it's a waste of time. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Brian Dolinar.
Good evening. My name is Brian Dolinar, and again, I write for the Public Eye newspaper of the Independent Media Center, and I teach at both the University of Illinois and at Parkland. Just today, I was at the county courthouse and encountered one of my former students at Parkland. He had a situation on Green Street. He was at Joe's Bar. There were a couple football players who had provoked a fight. The police arrived on the scene from several different districts, Urbana included. Police sprayed pepper spray up in the air, diffused the situation. The football players or the individuals they were pummeling were not arrested, but one of my Parkland students and his friend were arrested Friday night on the 14th. I helped them file a complaint in Champaign against a couple of the officers. But I'm here tonight specifically to speak in regards to the Sergeant Myers case and the way it has threatened to discredit the integrity of the Urbana Police Department. I want to say first off, all my encounters, barring one incident, have been very cordial, very professional at the Urbana Police Department. After dealing with Police Chief Finney and getting kicked out of one of his press conferences a few weeks ago, I'm so happy that Mike Bealy is so forthcoming and very friendly. I was there at the meeting with Aaron Ammons, Mike Bealy, Chris Evans, and Patrick Connolly, and Bealy was very forthcoming in telling us that Officer Hediger, on August 24, 2004, Officer Hediger failed. In the case of a serious case, it's always the case that the police would go investigate the crime scene, which the allegations against Patrick Thompson on August 24, 2004, very serious charges. Bealy told us up front that that it was protocol for Hediger to go enter the crime scene. That never occurred that day. But I'm here specifically to speak to the Sergeant Myers situation. There were some claims made last week, and I just wanted to clarify a few things about the Sergeant Myers case. But why it's important to the Champaign, why it's important to the Urbana Police Review Board is that there were several complaints filed in the Sergeant Myers story. Myers was turned in for tasing Ray Tsai in November of 2005, but there were 3 previous complaints in the previous year.
Would you clarify that Sergeant Myers is with the what?
Sergeant Myers is with the Sheriff's Department,
Okay,
or
thank you.
was a 14-year veteran of the Champaign Sheriff's Department. The sheriff processes all Urbana arrestees in the county jail. Myers had a total of 4 victims. He was only prosecuted for 1 of them. I was in the state's attorney's office pleading with them to look at some of these other cases. Of course, they had them on file because they'd all been investigated and were in the files. I found them myself looking over at the courthouse. I was pleading for them to look into these other cases. I gave them the contact for Michael Rich, one of Myers' victims. Michael Rich was never called until the day when his 2-year statute of limitations had expired. He was finally called by the state's attorney's office. There were 3 previous complaints. All of them were dismissed by Sheriff Dan Walsh. When we asked the sheriff publicly about the complaint process and how he felt about a police review board, he says there is one every 4 years, meaning the election. So he's completely indignant to the idea of a police review board, and it's why there's a culture that needs to be put into question and have some balance and checks on it. But this is also important in relationship to the decision of 415C, which puts the clampdown on police reports that the press can see and also that the defendants themselves can see or have copies of. We had a press conference with Michael Rich, one of Sergeant Myers' victims. This was December 1st of 2006 at the county courthouse. It was clear that I had gotten much in contact with Michael Rich because of my access to police records in the county courthouse. The following month, January of 2007, 415C is implemented so that press no longer has access to police reports. Now, you'll hear information on any crime coming out, probably in the newspaper tomorrow, that now the news reporters can only rely on the press statements, the press releases of the police themselves, which contain material, all right, that's beyond just what is the limited facts of the case. We get much more information, yet the press is not available to see the full information included in the police reports, which are public documents. We're not interested in trying individuals before they get a chance to reach trial, but we are interested in public accountability, which is why we're here today. How does this affect Urbana, the Sergeant Myers case? Just one last point. Daniel Bailey had picked up Michael Rich in November 2004. Michael Rich, white college student, 21 years old. He was a college student up in Chicago. This was his first time in Urbana-Champaign. He was picked up at the Canopy Club. He had a few extra drinks. He admits that he had been drinking too much. But in Urbana officers Dan Bailey's police reports, he says, quote, that Michael Rich was being, and here I'm quoting, just verbally abusive and not physically. Okay? In the report Sergeant Myers wrote, it was written, Mr. Rich was bleeding from his mouth area from the altercation he had prior coming to the jail, which the Urbana police report had clearly refuted. not only did Sergeant Myers, throw into question the integrity of Daniel Bailey, Urbana police officer, but also Jeremy Heath, who still works at the county jail. And the last information I got was that this Jeremy Heath is now supervisor of the downtown jail. And this is why we talk about a cover-up, is that Jeremy Heath is still working for the sheriff's department. Jeremy Heath wrote in his police report in regards to Michael Rich, quote, "Inmate Rich also made threats that he was going," I'm sorry, this is, I'm misquoting here. But in effect, Jeremy Heath says, here we go. That Heath also says, Jeremy Heath says that, quote, "Rich's lip was bleeding a little when UPD brought him in." From the Canopy Club, the UPD had written that Mr. Rich was not being physically or verbally abusive. So here we have actions of other police officers throwing into question the integrity of Urbana police officers. The integrity of Daniel Bailey and the police is questioned when other officers here locally falsify police reports and then get off with relatively little punishment. Sergeant Myers, for abusing 4 people, got off with a 12-month conditional discharge. This we find to be a great carriage of misjustice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else who'd like to address the council? Okay, let's move on. Reports of standing committees. That would be Danielle, correct?
Let's see. From the Committee of the Whole last week, we have ordinance number 2007-07-083, an ordinance repealing ordinance number 2007-06-048 that approves and authorizes the execution of an annexation agreement at 1714 East Airport Road by Gregory and Denise Reynolds, the petitioners. For the Committee of the Whole, I so move.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Chenoweth, seconded by Mr. Smythe. Is there any discussion? If not, would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Barnes?
Yes.
Mr. Bowersox?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Smythe?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Next, we have a number of Community Development Commission items. I refer to ordinance number 2007-07-073, also ending in 074, 075, 076, 077, 078, 079, 080, 081, and 082. I move these in omnibus fashion from the Committee of the Whole.
Second. Motion by Ms. Chenoweth, second by Ms. Barnes. Any questions?
I just want to point out to the public that might be watching that these are all standard agreements with various groups like Women's Fund Development Services, Francis Nelson, Crisis Nursery, Women's Fund, and so on.
Thank you. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Barnes?
Yes.
Mr. Bowersox?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Smythe?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
Motion carries. Ms. Chenoweth.
And last, we have ordinance number 2007-07-084, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to execute an intergovernmental agreements for animal impound services. This is with the County of Champaign for years 2007 and 2009. For the Committee of the Whole, I so move.
Second.
Motion by Ms. Chenoweth, second by Mr. Smythe. Any discussion? If not, would the clerk please call the roll? Thank you.
Ms. Barnes?
Yes.
Mr. Bowersox?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Smythe?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
That motion carries. Moving. All right. Ordinance number 2007-07-086, an ordinance approving a preliminary subdivision plat for Washington Square Second Subdivision. We have Robert Myers to explain this to us.
Okay. Real quickly, this is a two-lot commercial subdivision
on Philo Road. It's at the location just north of the curve on Philo Road where the 3 billboards are located. But again, this would be a commercial subdivision with 2 lots. And I'm requesting that you all take action on a perfected ordinance that I handed out tonight that includes a reference to a hammerhead turnaround at the south end of Washington Square. Washington Square is a stub street from the north that years ago was not completed, so we're left with the street that's a stub street. And the developers of this property to the south, they're going to take access from Philo Road, so they don't need access to the north, but they have agreed to construct this hammerhead turnaround that would allow people, when they come down to the end of the street, to make a 3-point turn and turn around. So it's an off-site improvement, but it would be for the benefit of the public.
Mr. Bowersox.
Yeah, I have just a handful of questions, and I'll be brief. First, I just wanted to ask about the ownership of the property that's to the north and south. Is it the city that owns those other lots where the sidewalks would be constructed so that we'd have a continuous sidewalk, or are there other property owners to the north and south?
Well, to the northwest and the southeast, I drove out this evening before the meeting, and my odometer, it's about 1/10 of a mile distance to the nearest sidewalks, both to the north and to the south, and which would have to cross other properties. For instance, to the south, Fairlawn Street's the nearest street where there's the nearest sidewalk. We anticipate that the sidewalk is going to go through at some point in the future. We don't know exactly when, but the applicants have requested a sidewalk deferral, not a waiver, but a deferral at such time as the city requests, in which case, within, I believe, 90 days, the property owner or the future property owner would have to install a sidewalk. And we'd like to do that logically at the time that adjoining sidewalks are installed.
But I guess in the Plan Commission notes, it sounded like the responsibility of paying for the sidewalks to the northwest and southeast would be the responsibility of the city of Urbana, like those were city-owned lots somehow. Is that our responsibility to fund? And when you talk about there might be sidewalks coming soon, is that because we're funding those in the CIP or through a sidewalk gap plan, or are these private owners who we expect to have sidewalks sooner than later?
Well, at the Plan Commission, when they talked about sidewalks, the question was asked, well, who's going to put in sidewalks? I don't see property owners to the northwest and southeast installing sidewalks anytime soon. Typically, those come at the time of a subdivision. So logically, I would think it would come as some sort of city project. Bill Gray can tell you more information.
Bill Gray, our expert on many things, including sidewalks.
Yeah, I think Robert hit it. In the absence of a subdivision that would occur, especially to the north, that's already a developed business. It's for sale right now. So the answer is, if we did a road project, we would pay 100% of the cost. But because this is a subdivision, that triggers infrastructure improvements, which includes a sidewalk. So they would be responsible for it.
Okay, so if we did a road project, we might just foot the bill of the sidewalks in those gaps.
For council policy,
and
yes.
then trigger this. Okay. My one other question about the sidewalks is that in the memo, it sounds like that 90-day policy is right, that when you, as the Public Works Director, as the city engineer, call up and say we want a sidewalk, that they have 90 days to install it. But on the face of the plat, the note just says that it is deferral from requirement to construct public sidewalks along Philo Road until such time as public sidewalks become contiguous along the west or east boundaries. So it's really different wording there. It says that they have to become contiguous to trigger it, rather than you just making a phone call and deciding through some policy reason to trigger it happening. Can you explain maybe what our policy is? I'm sure this is standard, but just what the difference is there in what's in the memo and what's on the plat, and how we typically do that, and which exactly is the trigger?
Trigger is a city engineer, public works director contacts to the property owner, referencing the plat, and probably would make those arrangements in some fashion. I mean, the language probably through the years may not be consistent, so there's probably some leeway as to the time frame, if it's 90 days or whatever.
Okay, and but we would have to have sidewalks on the other sides. We wouldn't just decide to trigger this and ask them to install it, or couldn't even, until there were contiguous sidewalks?
Or I would envision it as one continuous project.
Okay.
In other words, we're going to put sidewalks in from Washington to Fairlawn along the east side of Philo, the city pays for so many feet, but this particular stretch, the owners of these lots would pay for that stretch.
Okay, thank you. I support the deferral. Thank you. That's helpful.
Danielle Chenoweth?
Brendan, could you just say what language you were reading from? I was trying to find it.
Oh, yeah. The actual language on the face of the plat comes in the little plat notes.
Oh, God, I can't
And in this
read.
column of plat notes, note number 12 is the waivers, variances, and deferrals. And the last paragraph of note 12 is that deferral language that I think this really gets recorded with the circuit clerk, and this is the plat that gets stamped and on file, and I think is the real legally binding document. And the wording is slightly different, and so I just want to understand.
Okay, so my first question is, can we make that language say what your memo says, which is it's up to our department when to choose that? That's one question I have, in particular because it looks like there are sidewalks on the north side on Washington Street, and it could be the case that actually, at least from this picture, it looks like someone could be walking along the sidewalk on Washington Street and basically cut on the east or west side of this property. It looks like there's places to walk along there, and then basically wouldn't, and then might continue along their way and they wouldn't have a sidewalk. So there are ways to access that property from other places that have sidewalks. So I asked that question because I think I'd prefer to leave it, I prefer the language in the memo which says it's up to our city engineers. Or is this like boilerplate that we can't change necessarily? It's either thumbs up or thumbs down on this language.
Well, we've determined that the plat meets the minimum requirements for the subdivision ordinance. I think this ensures what we need, because I can't logically see that we would require the stretch of sidewalk until there's going to be contiguous sidewalks. I mean, what would be the rationale for the city requiring them to install sidewalks unless there's going to be adjoining sidewalks?
My second question is, does the deferral transfer owners forever until such time? So does it move with the plat no matter what with the plat of land, no matter how many owners it goes through?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, and since Bill's sitting there, why wouldn't we just vacate Washington Square at this point rather than continue?
Why would we vacate
Yeah,
it?
why wouldn't we? Why should we keep it? Why wouldn't we vacate it, given that they don't need access anymore to the other properties? It becomes basically a private drive at this point, doesn't it?
Well, there's at least 3 owners that are contiguous
okay.
to it, and it would be awkward if we did, I think.
Yeah. At least one property owner would be landlocked, and they wouldn't have access directly to a public street if we did that. But that's something we actually even discussed as a possibility early on.
Yeah. There's 3. On the east side, there's 1 owner remaining, and on the west side, there's 2 different property owners. So that would justify the need for a public street still.
Okay.
Is there a motion on this? Motion by Ms. Stevenson, seconded by Mr. Smythe. Is there any further discussion? If not, would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Barnes?
Yes.
Mr. Bowersox?
Yes.
Ms. Shenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Smythe? Yes. Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
That motion carries. Next, ordinance number 2007-07-087, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to execute an amendment to the real estate option and contract at 115 to 119 North Race Street. Tom Carino.
Evening. In January of this year, City Council entered into a real estate option and contract to purchase 115 through 119 North Race, which is commonly known as the former Denny's Cleaners along Race Street. We issued a request for proposal for redevelopment of that property, and the developer of choice was JSM, who has proposed a mixed-use development, retail on the first floor, residential above, Through the due diligence period, it was determined that additional environmental assessment activities needed to take place, and because of that, we needed to extend the option beyond what currently the contract has, and we also have worked out an agreement with the owner that they will, or the city will fund the environmental assessment on the property with the understanding that that money spent will be credited back to the city as part of the purchase price. Now, there is one change from the ordinance that you were presented in your packet, and that is before you, and that minor change is that we will be changing the amount of reimbursement, the amount of the maximum reimbursement for the environmental assessment from $33,000 to $35,000, and that was agreed upon by the representatives of the current owner. So what you have before you is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to extend the option and also to begin environmental assessment services.
I'd like to move approval.
Motion by Ms. Barnes, seconded by Ms. Stevenson. Any other questions? Would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Barnes?
Yes.
Mr. Bowersox?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Mr. Smythe?
Yes.
Ms. Stevenson?
Yes.
That motion carries. And finally, we come to action directing the acting city attorney to petition to intervene in the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District cases now pending. I think we have a rationale here that we have an interest in encouraging mass transit, and I think the city of Champaign has already taken similar action. We're basically trying to say that we should have a unified system instead of a fragmented system. I think that's the essence of it. Ms. Chenoweth.
I'd like to move approval of this action.
Motion by Ms. Chenoweth, seconded by Mr. Smythe.
If I could speak to the motion briefly.
Sure.
I think some of the questions that have come up in the public debate over this issue is, what does this intervention have to do with Urbana? And in particular, I think the issue at stake for our constituents who live in Urbana is, first of all, Urbana residents work in Savoy. Some of them might work at, for example, the Walmart or Body and Soul or the various et cetera. And so it's important that they be able to access those businesses where they work. And it's also important for those residents who benefit from having those services available to help to pay for the public transit infrastructure. The second thing is that I think we all know this from the issue of kind of the economy of scale, is if we have one continuous public transit system that we work together as a whole community to build, it's actually cheaper for each part. And so in some ways, it's important for us to assert good planning practices, which is to have one continuous mass transit system that serves the community. And therefore, I support this intervention, and I support us continuing to kind of partner with our area communities to try to have one single system that serves everyone in the most affordable way possible.
Ms. Stevenson.
I don't see anything here that says anything about fiscally where this puts the city of Urbana, what kind of monies are going to be spent. And what I've heard from my constituents, and 85% of them, is this is not a Urbana issue, and to please leave it alone. That's what I've heard from the constituents of mine in Ward 6. And so my question is, what kind of monies is this going to take? And my comment is that this is not what my constituents think that is good for the city, and so my vote would be no on intervening.
Okay. Kurt Borman, our Assistant City Attorney.
Mayor, I can comment on the issue of the cost. The cost of intervening in this lawsuit to the city of Urbana will be negligible. The reason is that this litigation is already underway. It's already in court right now. There's already attorneys on both sides litigating this issue. And what this intervention would do would simply involve the city filing court papers asking to be a party to this suit. And at some point, one of us from the legal division might have to come to court occasionally simply to stand up and to let the judge know that this is in fact what the city wants, but we will not actually be litigating this case. We will not be actually be the ones fighting it. We will simply file some papers, and occasionally, if we get called into court to answer a question, that would be it. So there really wouldn't be any particular cost.
Thank you. Anyone else? If not, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay, that motion carries. There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.